breaking news. Warden forces have raised the blue banner on their former capital of abandoned Ward.
Groups, I saw Bear here. Today, I thought I'd start the new year off with a bit more of a light-hearted suggestion series regarding lore. We like it, so give us more, devs. Quick pause before we go on. This script was actually written before the last update, when they added in a bunch of new lore, locations, items, and even some treasure hunts, as I covered in a previous video. That being said, this PowerPoint is still relevant, I promise. This presentation won't focus exclusively on written lore detailing the backstory of certain characters and all that. It's more just going to be a series of mechanics that could be tied into world building, that kind of thing. So, what will I be talking about? The Foxhole lore, very briefly. How is lore displayed in-game currently? Ideas for map and lore locations. Lore items, vehicles, and buildings that could be added. Builders and utility lore. Seasons and weather. Soldier customization. It's not what you think, or maybe it's exactly what you think. And the history of soldier customization in Foxhole, because there's always a little bit of a history lesson. So, the lore of Foxhole is really secretive and a little bit convoluted, so instead I'm going to point you towards Beeflord, who's been doing a series of Foxhole lore videos, and who has done a much better job than I ever could.
Foxhole lore. It's mysterious, confusing, and the source of a tremendous amount of salt on Reddit. In fact, while doing my research for this deep dive into the lore, never in my life have I seen so many people who could really benefit from going outside and touching grass.
Well, seeing as my real job is in ecology, I don't feel that I'm one of the people who needs to touch grass any more than I already do. So, let's move on. How is lore shown in-game? There are certain unique items that you can find scattered around the map. The pack of cigarettes is probably the most obvious one. Unique locations. These are prompted areas where you can discover journals or little details about the areas you explore. Unique locations that are unmarked. For example, this old fort tower, which actually used to be the old relic bases that I found still within the world. Town names. Plenty of towns are named after characters or after events in Foxhole's past. More than enough towns that bear Callahan's name. Monumental structures, large buildings or statues, that sort of thing. Item description. Every item, every weapon, every vehicle usually has a description associated with it in one of the menus. Faction anthems. One I almost forgot to include on this list, but I love those anthems. Wish there were more of them. And of course, the Chronicles of Ashes. However, Chronicles of Ashes is something written outside of the game. And while we're speaking of Chronicles of Ashes, I want to point out that there's a fantastic community radio play based off the Chronicles of Ashes from the 93rd Artillery Regiment. I'll leave a link down in the description. Here's a little excerpt of it.
In a couple hours, it'll be lights out anyway, and no one will care that we're gone.
Where?
What do you mean?
Where are we going?
Out. For a walk. I promise it'll be worth it. Meet behind the barracks in 20. Oh, and bring your rifle.
Astrid flung herself off the bunk, scooped up her own rifle, a satchel, and a lantern.
So gameplay lore ideas. These are my ideas, but also some ideas that have been compiled by suggestions I received while I was discussing this over on Twitch. The reasons they ought to be gameplay related, because they're more likely to be added by the developers, because it helps to increase or change up gameplay, but also it's relevant to all players, not just the lore hunter. So, map locations and ideas. District or road names within towns. Popping up yet another Valkyria Chronicles reference, but the ability to be able to distinguish roads from each other in the larger urban areas like Saltbrook Channel would be really useful in urban combat, and it would give the developers yet another set of areas where they could use names, hints at the lore within urban areas. If you really wanted to increase the ante on road and street names, you could make it so that colonials or wardens, when they're advancing into the opposing team's backline regions, they don't get access to the street or road names because it's more unfamiliar territory to them. Only the locals living in those areas would know those streets by heart. You know, that sort of thing. Different victory conditions. I think the devs could experiment playing around with victory conditions in wars. Instead of having it be capture 32 towns, how about capture the capital? Force everyone to fight for the large capital cities of Callum's Cape and Chorizo? Or maybe a battle of ballistics. Maybe the team that launches the most nukes gets to claim victory. It changes up the victory conditions, changes up the focus of certain maps if they revolve around different things. And lastly, expanded map. I'm not talking about expanding the physical area where players can interact. I understand there's a limit to how big the world really can be. Even if it's not accessible, some of these areas could stand to be named. It wouldn't add a whole lot to the gameplay elements, but it certainly would give you something else to look at while you're staring at the map. Item, vehicles, and buildings. One-time use and one-time spawn civilian vehicles at the start of a war. We have those relic LUVs and those relic buses. It would be cool to have some hints of what happened to the civilian populations once the war started up, but also to give access to some early vehicles to both factions to help kickstart a war. Next up, carryable flags. This is one the community's been asking for a while. Being able to carry flags into battle. How to make it more viable in gameplay is the ability to deploy these flags as wind indicators. Imagine if you're moving up an artillery battery. Do you really want to spend 60 BMATs to set up a watchtower or pillbox? Maybe you do, but if you don't, a small carryable flag able to be deployed as a wind indicator would be a cool and lore-friendly alternative. Museum buildings in the capital cities. Maybe it's a really large structure, like larger than any structure we've had in game yet. Maybe there's a couple of pieces of lore, a couple of statues in the museum. It'd be a cool environmental piece, but just being able to fight inside a much larger building, I think would really break up some of the city gameplay as well. And graffiti that indicates flanking routes, passages, or general tips around towns or other locations in-game. A lot of people, when they're fighting over Saltbrook Channel, don't realize you can actually swim the channel at some of the docks. Some of them don't even realize you can actually climb up the vines inside of the city, use them as ladder. Adding graffiti would not only make the world feel more lived in, it would be a good opportunity to incorporate more lore into any urban environment, but also to help indicate to players flanking routes or hints or tips that they can use around the city. Builders/utility ideas. Map and location searching is something that is a must. I'll have to keep harping on this until it's added. This one I'm debating even including in this presentation, but loading screen tips and lore info on loading screens would be kind of fun, although for me anyways, the loading screens aren't particularly long, so I don't know how much I would personally get out of this. Digging trenches reveals buried items. Digging trenches is pretty monotonous. It's a required part of the wars, but not really a whole lot to it other than pressing left click. If digging trenches had a % chance to reveal bodies, and maybe those bodies had certain items on them, small items, you know, like a bit of ammo or maybe a few extra materials, not only would that be really useful for builders, getting a little bit of extra resources while they're building, but it would also add this really creepy but really lore-intensive way to say, hey, wars have been fought here for generations. If you've been playing for as long as I have, practically is the case. Press Corps integration into the game. Press Corps has been a part of the Foxhole community for years now, and they are fantastic at what they do. And I understand that there would be a lot of difficulty in adding a live radio feed to Foxhole that would be incredibly strenuous on the servers. However, a long time ago, there was a different map tool that was not FoxholeStats.com. It was the Foxhole Global HQ. And in this map tool, which unfortunately has never been updated for years at this point, there was a feature that when a town was captured, The press corps would have a small radio announcement announcing which town has been captured by which faction. Here's an example.
Breaking news. Warden forces have raised the blue banner on their former capital of abandoned ward.
I'm so glad I was able to record that audio line back in the day. But honestly, this is such a cool feature. There's already notifications in the top left-hand corner in-game. Why not associate these small press corps radio announcements as an audio cue for those notifications? Being able to describe like the history of a town in a short sentence when one faction captures it, that is so cool. I would love to see that in-game. Plus the audio files are already there. I'm sure press corps would be happy to give some over. Community papers integration. There's plenty of community-run papers in Foxhole, and these are awesome. There's also plenty of newsstands in the game. What if there was the ability, maybe even if it was just once per war, for a couple of these newspapers to tell, the story of recent events or the last war that happened? Seasonal weathers. So, weathers are already a thing in game. Some players don't mind it, some players hate it. I think a lot of the hate doesn't necessarily come from having to deal with winter itself. I think a lot of it stems from its unpredictability, which is why seasons in Foxhole would make a lot of sense. Obviously, we'd need weather stations or base upgrades, maybe a stove room for bunkers to heat them up so you don't have to build a campfire outside of the bunker every 5 minutes because a truck keeps running them over. These upgrades would either add heating elements to bunkers, like I just suggested, or short-term weather predictions. But I say short-term specifically. 2 or 3 days advance notice, no more than that. The long-term weather prediction would come from seasons. In real life, seasons last roughly 90 days, thereabouts, so why not add 90-day seasons to Foxhole? Weather patterns would change every 90 days. Summer would have very little precipitation in general. Fall and spring would have higher chances of rain, and winter would have higher chances of snow. On the gameplay side, this adds a level of predictability so that logistics can plan for winter and wintry conditions, or spring or summer conditions. Instead of having to be ready to produce winter uniforms at any given time for any given location, a higher chance of snow in wintertime in a set 90 days period makes it much more predictable for Logi. If you're in the dead of summer, logistics won't have to worry about winter uniforms. But if you're in the dead of winter, logistics knows your uniforms are probably needed. This also adds to the lore. Some of Foxhole's longest running wars have gone on for years in-game, or at least over a year. Having the environment tell the story of how long a war lasts, that would be huge. That would be such a cool way to show time passing in-game. Not just day and night cycles, but actual seasonal cycles. You could also make it so that wars always start in the spring or summer, so that winter weather doesn't shut down fronts immediately after the start of a war. I mean, really, who invades another country in the dead of winter? And lastly is soldier customization. It's not what you think. I'm thinking more of a D&D, Dungeons & Dragons style character sheet customization. Customizable on the main menu. You can add in a little bit of self-lore info, add whether you're looking for or part of a regiment, the ability to check fallen enemies, or what their character sheets are to find out who you actually killed or what they specialize in, and maybe the possibility of finding lore on the game's map in order to customize your character loadout screen, or maybe add just like a little medal to your character's uniform. Nothing huge, just little trinkets here and there to encourage people to actually go out and seek lore, and maybe even visit maps that are less popular. And maybe you can actually keep track of these lore pieces in a journal or a codex, kind of similar to how Battlefield 1 handled it, where completing certain goals or finding certain items in the campaign would actually unlock codex pages that you could browse later for more information on the item or the history behind something. And funny enough, we used to have a system similar to that in the form of player profiles. This was all the way back in the alpha in update 0.034. We used to have player customizable pages on the main menu.
Some basic player profiles have been added into the game. The devs note that this is a bare-bone feature, mostly for testing at the moment, but you can edit profiles from the main menu now. You can give yourself a name, give yourself an outfit or a squad, and even write a little bit of a description at the bottom. You can do this for both Warden and Colonial characters. And if all of you who are watching right now have had the chance to play the pre-alpha, you will receive a special medal on your profile, indicating that you did participate in the pre-alpha stage of Foxhole.
Yeah, I want that back. Give me my medal back. So some final thoughts. There is much more room for lore to be added into Foxhole, but there's also the possibility to unlock gameplay features through that lore or environmental storytelling. Not every new addition to the game needs to be hard items or numbers. Sometimes, a little story goes a long way. So, my question to you is, what topics/sections would you put on your character sheet? Actually, I'm just going to write an example character sheet for myself, minus some fancy pictures from Mummy, down in the comments below, and feel free to do the same. So thanks again for watching this Foxhole suggestion series. I've already asked the community what the next suggestion series will be, and that's going to be on the possibility or the feasibility of having air power or aircraft in Foxhole. So I will be working on that, and that one's probably going to take me a while to write. That is a big can of worms, as it were. So that one might take a while, but welcome everyone to the new year, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one. And as always, good luck, keep your heads down, stay in your foxholes. Bear out.